This episode is sponsored by Furniture Box. Check them out in the description below.
I'm proud of every single decision I've made.
Will Englander, who is the founder of The Root Co.
Mostly sort of disorganized, but becoming more organized madness.
What's the first thing you did?
I was basically doing everything myself, Googling a recipe and giving it a whirl. By the way, it's easier to peel ginger with the back of a teaspoon than it is to use a regular peeler.
What was the kind of initial starting capital?
There was basically no budget for marketing. That was basically how I started. There was an element of...
So if you were to go back and do that again, how would you do it differently?
Well, I guess the key...
You mentioned that you nearly lost your life.
The situation was I'd come back from a night out. My jacket had got nicked from the bar I was in, and it was a freezing cold night and a bit of a blizzard. So I was basically jogging home, slipped over, and then a car came and hit me. We need to kind of sedate you now because there's quite a big risk to your life.
How does your perspective change when something like that happens?
I think a good day for me looks like...
Welcome to the Ground Floor Podcast, a podcast where we are successful people exactly how they did it. Our guest today is Will Englander, who is the founder of The Root Co., which is a ginger beer company. We haven't tried it yet, and we're really excited to try it on the air. But for now, thanks for being here, Will.
Thanks very much for having me. I've actually listened to a few of your episodes, and starting them all with successful, I feel like, a bit of an imposter be sitting here.
We've had a bunch of people that have felt the same, but it's like you have done something successful, you built a company, and you branched out on your own. Like, that's success in itself. It's not measured by anything else.
That's kind of you to say.
Yeah,
it's nice. It's very nice to be here chatting to you guys anyway.
It's great
it's good to have you. We were saying just before we started, actually, kind of giving you as a bit of a background to what you were doing before the Root Company. Do you mind just kind of giving an idea to people that are listening as to sort of what you were doing before you set it up?
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in London, went to university, and straight out of university, my first job was as a management consultant here in London. And I did that for about 3 years. And around the 2.5 year mark, that was summer 2020, we were under lockdown. I started actually making some ginger beer. I'd had the idea originally back in 2018 after a general anaesthetic operation, and that was linked to the accident I was telling you about right at the beginning. So I basically made the decision to leave that job and try and branch out on my own, try and make a product, try and start a business. And it's been a pretty incredible experience so far. It's been a hell of a lot of learning, mostly very fun, mostly sort of disorganized but becoming more organized madness. But yeah, there's been enough progress and enough resonance of the product in the market to continue.
So you don't make a root beer?
Don't make a root beer.
So you're the Root Co., but you make
a ginger beer. Yeah.
That's curious. Why did that? How did that happen?
To be honest with you, it was the brand name is not something I thought very intensely about. I wanted to start a business selling ginger beer. I knew that the Root Co. was a good idea because I was going to really focus on the fresh ingredients and on the ginger. And then it kind of became a bit more of a point of confusion when I started selling the ginger beer and people were like, oh, so you're the root beer guy. I was like, no, I'm actually the ginger beer guy, but it's called the Root Co. And they were like, so what's ginger ale? Just as you guys have done.
We make McDonald's burgers. What's your company? It's called KFC Limited.
Yeah. Exactly.
Accurate comparison.
Honestly, it's a fair analogy.
And it says here on the tin. I love the design, by the way. I mentioned that off air, but it is really cool, and I can feel that it's paper.
That's good.
Which is good because that's very environmental.
You can.
But it says here that it says 5 natural ingredients. There are literally just 5 ingredients in this.
Yeah, that's right. So I think usually if you're a food and drink brand, you always claim to have started in the kitchen. For me, I basically researched a recipe on Google. It was a BBC one, and started making ginger beer. Initially, I was fermenting it using brewer's yeast, so ended up with a slightly alcoholic product. But then I used a SodaStream sparkling water and made a non-alcoholic one, iterated it a bunch of times, and I was just fully in control of what was going in there. And as I was thinking about the proposition, this was actually still while I was in my previous job, I wanted to tackle a few different things as I kind of got my head behind the idea of starting this business. First of all, it just wanted to be an extra gingery ginger beer. And then I started to think, actually, what really bugs me about soft drinks that I've tried, and it's usually really convoluted ingredients and names you can't pronounce. And I think we live in an age where things are being investigated really closely in terms of how they perform versus your gut health and how they are for you long term, and anything that's potentially harmful. There was a bunch of news a few weeks ago about aspartame, which is a very
Yeah, I
popular
saw that with
sweetener.
The whole Diet Coke thing.
Yeah.
Which I think is a good thing to expose that kind of stuff. Because I mean, even to be fair, even coming here today, I knew a little bit about the company, but I was like, I'm quite strict with what I put in my body now. And even me, I was like, is there going to be a bunch of sugary shit in this? But it literally, I mean, it says it on the can for anyone listening or watching. It says fizz, ginger, maple, lime, and mint. And that's it. That's all that's in here.
Yeah. And it's quite a painstaking process to make it as simple as it is, because you have to think about a bunch of things when you're producing a canned drink. You have to think about acidity in particular. So we use lime juice, and all of our acidity comes from that. And because we have a juicing process, there is intrinsic variability in our product batch to batch. So we juice fresh ginger and fresh lime. That kind of lends itself to risk from an acidity point of view, because if the limes are less juicy, or there's been something affecting the harvest, we can end up with a less acidic or more acidic product. So you have to be a little bit careful about. And yeah, before you pop that open, just give it a little bit of a tip for me. Just a little movement up and down. You can actually be a bit stronger with that. I'm going to show you. If you just go like that, and there you go. Just a little bit.
Has he got some sediment?
I'm now worried it's going to explode. You've got to stop. There we go.
I do the whole, from Scrubs, the John Dorian 3-tap method, 3 taps, and then you pour it and it goes everywhere.
There we go. It didn't explode.
It didn't. I think that the trick is is you just leave it a little bit, let it all come out, and then do the other 10.
I really like that. I know what you mean. It has definitely got that fiery kick that sits at the back of your throat. I really like that.
That's nice. I don't really drink this flavored drink normally. I quite like it.
It feels.
It's not overly sweet.
It feels quite clean. Just when you're drinking it, it doesn't actually feel like there's loads of components to it. How sometimes if you take a drink of something that's not very healthy for you, it doesn't taste natural. This actually really does taste quite clean.
The thing in the back of the throat, it's not overpowering. Because I've had ginger shots before, and I quite like them occasionally, and they are really good for you. But it is a thing of like, I'd almost rather do a shot of tequila or something if I still drank. Do you know what I mean? It's very harsh, but this is really like, it's a bit moreish.
Yeah, well, it's I think you'll find as you drink more of it, then the heat at the back of your throat does intensify, because it stays there for a bit. It just accumulates. So you'll probably end up thinking it's spicier than you do now. But I think it's one of the coolest things about the drink, and certainly something I didn't anticipate when I first started out. I wasn't like, I want to make a drink with this really cool thing where after you finished a can, it actually stays in the back of your throat for ages and makes you feel super well. I was just like, I want to make a ginger beer. But as it happens, when you start playing around with fresh ingredients and really get all of that flavour into your canned drinks, then you can create something quite cool.
How sort of much does this veer on the side of having the similar health benefits of a ginger shot, for example, versus
it says great for your gut on the can.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, because we juice all of our ginger. It means that we get all of the nutritional benefit and also all of the immune system benefit. The benefits for your digestion. Ginger is very good at breaking up gas in your digestive system and promoting even peristalsis. So all we've done is heat treat it. So a ginger shot you usually have to keep cold, because it is just pure fresh juice in there, which I think is really cool. And I drink ginger shots. For us, we wanted to make something that was shelf stable, that you could store not in a fridge, and it would be totally fine. So after the drink is made, you have to pasteurize it. So the drinks get pasteurized at temperature, and that definitely takes some of the edge off. When you try our drinks, they always sit in a big tank before we can them. Right. When you try them before they're pasteurized, they taste unbelievably good.
Really?
Like really, really good. And part of me just wants to stop there.
Yeah.
But it would be spoiled in a week.
I really like this, man.
No, so do I.
It's a really nice option to have when you want to have something that's not water and you don't drink, and you want to have something that just tastes nice, and you don't have to finish it being like, well, I'll probably have to burn that off, but it was fun while it lasted. Like, it's actually feels really good for you.
Where can you find it?
Yeah.
Good question. So most of our distribution is here in London, although we supply a bunch of sites outside of London too, across the UK, and actually a couple of stores in the US, believe it or not.
Oh
yeah. But the biggest one here in London are the Planet Organic stores. But we also supply lots of nice independent delis, small chains. We supply a chain of bakeries in Suffolk and Norfolk called the Two Magpies Bakeries. So you can find our stuff there. But we, at the moment anyway, we haven't broken into really mass distribution, no supermarkets, nothing like that. And to be totally honest with you, we're now a 2-person team. My co-founder Lucy joined 4 or 5 months ago. But the truth is that I don't think we'd be ready sitting here now. I don't feel like we'd be ready to fulfill a massive order. There's still work we need to do on our supply chain. I'm heading out to East Africa at the start of September to try and figure out how we do our sourcing and our juicing a bit more effectively, because we're really obsessed with nice, clean, simple supply chains. And you might have noticed that all of our ingredients are from a single origin too, kind of knowing as much as we can. We've got our simple recipe. It doesn't take, well, it does take quite a lot of work, but not loads and loads of work to really investigate actually how those ingredients come into the UK. And
the fizz is from the UK, the ginger's from Tanzania, the maple's from Canada, the lime's from Morocco, and the mint is from the UK as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so going into like actually building the business and starting it up, because there's probably people listening that have thought about starting some sort of either, a bakery or even a drinks-based business themselves.
Yeah.
So you have the idea. You think, I might, I'm not happy with the alternatives for ginger beer.
Yes.
I might have a go at making my own. But you're a management consultant at this point. You're just a guy working a white-collar office job. So what's the first thing you did?
Well, I guess I'd want to start by saying a key difference between myself and, let's say, a regular management consultant is I'm very lucky and very privileged, which I think allowed me to take a risk in a more carefree way than most people would. I think lots of...
What do you mean in that sense?
I mean that... for me, I was able to think about leaving my job a bit more seriously. I had lots of good reasons for leaving and starting my own thing, but I was able to think about it a lot more seriously and without the same kind of financial pressures that I think most people would.
Got you.
And I think it would be pretty dishonest not to acknowledge that I'm insanely lucky.
No, I respect that.
And that has allowed me to start this, and indeed all of the savings that I built up to start the business. Lots of those came from living at home, and not everyone has that chance. So to start with, very lucky. But back to your question, which was kind of how do you begin?
The first thing you did. But I respect you saying that. It's good to acknowledge that kind of stuff. And also, it's it's not where you're born, it's where you're made and what you do, and you've worked really hard. So it's good to acknowledge the fact that there is a luck factor there as well, because I think a lot of people don't do that.
Yeah, I think for me, the psychology I got myself into before leaving the job is I'm really lucky here, and it would kind of be rude not to try. Like an option would be for me to continue working in a job I didn't like and continue earning lots of cash. But kind of more interesting and more exciting would be trying to build something, and my mission here is less about I probably should say from a branding side, like I want to bring the most amazing gingery drinks to the UK market and beyond, or something like that. But the truth is, I just want to build a team and give everyone in the team a really good experience, and hopefully sell some nice gingery products along the way. But it's more for me about developing a project that can employ people, provide an experience for people. I think that's a more compelling mission for me than just staying in the same job.
So the first thing that you did, you have this idea and you think I might make some ginger beer. What do you do? First step.
So I initially started making it, as I said before, in the kitchen, and that was literally Googling a recipe and giving it a whirl. And
is that, by the way, is that literally just going to Sainsbury's and buying, the recipe on Google says, all right, buy mint, buy ginger. Like, we like to drill into the practical here so that people know exactly what they can do.
Yeah, no, and rightly so. So I bought ginger and lime. At this point, there was no mint in the recipe at all. It was ginger, lime, sugar, and water. And I was also using brewer's yeast as well to do a bit of fermentation. And then basically I ended up peeling lots of ginger. And by the way, it's easier to peel ginger with the back of a teaspoon than it is to use a regular peeler. Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Top tip.
You hold the spoon with its convex bit against your thumb, and you use the tip of it, and you just it takes ages.
Okay.
So you've got to be pretty determined. Anyway, I started off by peeling loads and loads of ginger, and then kind of getting it into a pulp and letting it ferment with some water. And then I started to refine kind of my kitchen process a bit and change the way that I was sweetening the drink, and change the way that or the amount of ginger I was putting in. So it got to the point where I was quite routinely making batches of ginger beer on the weekends in my last job. And the process for that was ginger, lime. I think it was actually just ginger in it originally. Ginger into a NutriBullet, blitz it up into a pulp, and then press it through a fine sieve with the back of a spoon.
Yeah.
Lots of spoons involved, apparently. This was actually a bigger spoon. Small spoon won't get you very far. And that gives you this amazing fresh ginger juice. And then you can repeat the process with limes, or at the time I was actually just squeezing them like you'd normally get juice from a lime. But you can also blitz it up into a pulp and press it and juice it the same way. And then I was cooking that juice with sugar. So you'd have like a little pasteurization process. I think I'd also added water before cooking it at that stage. So you were really pasteurizing the liquid, and then I was putting it in these big glass jars. That was basically how I started. And then there was an element of thought about what I wanted the product to be. So I knew I didn't want it to be alcoholic. That's when the brewer's yeast ended. And I knew that I wanted to think really carefully about how I was sourcing my fresh ginger, which is where I came up with this idea for supply chain out of East Africa, because I read a lot of academic research about East African ginger being not only stronger but higher in gingerol, which is the bioactive compound in ginger that yields all the health benefits, the kind of things we were speaking about earlier, great for your gut, good antioxidant properties, anti-nausea, good for kind of perking up your energy a little bit too. I find that that's one of the benefits. But on a personal level, I really like ginger for the stomach one in particular. I'm quite prone to stress. Like I don't drink any coffee. So I was having a ginger shot instead of a coffee mid-afternoon in my last job, and that was helping perk me up a little bit. So I knew that I wanted to kind of really emphasize the gingery aspect and make it so that it would be good for people if they were struggling with their digestion. And it's only very lightly fizzy. You've probably noticed it was less fizzy than a Coke.
Yeah,
it was.
Fizzy. Can I just ask quickly, by the way, when you mentioned the supply chain out of East Africa, you found the benefits for it. That's why you wanted to do it.
Yeah.
But for anyone listening, I mean, I would have no idea how you even go about finding a supply chain in East Africa. Like,
great.
Logistically.
Yeah, and I didn't really know either, which is why I spoke to another friend of mine. His older sister lives in Nairobi, and I kind of said, hello, we've never met before. Her name's Jules. She's absolutely fantastic, and we're still in touch this day, and indeed sorting out my supply chain still, almost 2.5 years later. But I said to her, I have this ambition to import fresh ginger from East Africa, and she was so kind and on board with it and really willing to just give me loads of her time, totally free of charge, helped investigate export partners, places to kind of source the ginger. When we first used this supply chain, it was basically just through an export partner. So we found a woman in Kenya called Helen, and Helen's expertise was exporting all kinds of fresh fruit and veg from Kenya to usually the Netherlands, sometimes the UK. There are quite a few fresh exports that come out of Kenya, including things like flowers, and lots of those go to Amsterdam too. But anyway, Helen basically had contacts for fresh ginger and was able to source from a farmer's market in central Uganda, source this fresh ginger, washed it, packed it, and then sent it here to the UK. And it was all very experimental because the quantity it felt large to me, but quite small in terms of international shipments. It was 1,000 kilograms, so a metric ton. And it had to be air freighted, so sent by air, which wasn't very environmental and quite costly.
How much are we talking cost-wise for that?
So it was about £2.40 per kilogram.
Right.
So
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
about
quite a significant.
2.5K.
Yeah. Quite a significant outlay.
On that note, what was the kind of initial starting capital for that?
So for the whole project, I gave myself a budget of around £40,000, which was, basically my savings.
Yeah.
I gave myself the budget. Sounds like sounds pretty grand, but yeah, I basically had my savings, and I spent some of that cash on a bit of equipment, actually, a juicer, and that juicer that I bought back in 2021 still sits in our co-manufacturer's facility down in Devon. We've been using that juicer for every single product we've made to date. We're thinking of changing things slightly in juicing in East Africa, as I mentioned earlier. That makes sense from an environmental standpoint, and also probably from a cost one, and a nice kind of circularity and continuity, I guess, with the project, because at the moment it takes about 40 hours of juicing to make a batch of our drinks, which is about 36,000 cans. And if we were to suddenly need to make 10 times that number for whatever reason, then it's kind of it's 400 hours of juicing. It's suddenly stacking up.
Do you know how many cans you've sold?
Yeah, I do know how many cans I've sold. It will be, at this point, I mean, I wish I had my nice Excel spreadsheet in front of me, but I think it must be around 70, 80,000, something like that, maybe more.
Are you going to do anything big for the 100,000th can?
I probably should. I should mark it in some way.
I think you should, man. That's a big step.
It's a big milestone.
Yeah. Although I see things on LinkedIn about, you know, the millionth can and all of this stuff. So
Yeah,
I'm a bit
but
like, yeah, no, a lot of stuff left to do.
It's an opportunity for content.
Definitely.
Yeah, true.
With the
sorry,
I was going to say with the £40,000 then that you were mentioning
Yes.
earlier. So obviously you had some of that towards actually
Juicer.
getting the ginger and
Yeah.
the juicer and that sort of thing. How else did you sort of allocate it, and sort of how did you actually start with marketing the business from kind of day one?
There was basically no budget for marketing, and to be honest, no budgeting exercise done at all. That's why at the beginning I was kind of like, it's a organised/disorganised madness, because it definitely started quite disorganised and is continually getting more organised and turning into more of a professionalised business, which is good, but it definitely didn't start that way. I was basically doing everything myself, so built the website myself and was doing kind of the bare minimum on Instagram and some LinkedIn stuff. I had a supportive network around me that made it feel like actually those comms and the marketing I was doing was going out quite a long way. But the truth is I produced a ton of drinks without having the faintest clue how to sell them, how they would sell, and the work involved in sales. And if there's anything that I would say I've learned, it's that actually, unfortunately, once you make a product, that's definitely not it. You need to go out and sell the thing. And it sounds super obvious sitting here now, and I'm almost sort of embarrassed that I ever thought it would be differently. But I don't have a brain that's naturally inclined towards sales. I think I'm good at befriending people and meeting people, and that's definitely come in useful when I've been walking into stores and getting the product out there. But to be honest, I find the process of emailing people and getting ignored and people not having the time of day for you and your nice new spicy product, I find it slightly soul destroying.
It's not for everyone. It's definitely not for everyone.
It's not for everyone. And I thought that in my naivety, I was initially naive, and then I thought, okay, there'll probably come a point where I get enough distribution that a bit of momentum will start to build, and then it'll get easier to build the business and so on. In
terms of the materials, where are you storing them? The ingredients, like so, for example, the 1,000 kilos of ginger.
Sorry, yeah,
it's not in your flat.
No, it's not. It's not in my flat. So one of the best decisions that I made was to do a trial production run. So I imported that first 1,000 kilograms of ginger, and it went straight into cold storage. And I took a very small quantity, I think it was about 40 kilograms, and used it to make my first kind of trial batch with the juicer in the factory, making the drinks the way that they would be made at scale. Because up to then I didn't have any intermediary. I think lots of people will do a bit of recipe stuff, be like, oh, that tastes quite good, and then take it over to a flavor developer who will basically say, okay, you need this acidity regulator and this also in your drinks to kind of control consistency and emulsifiers and all this stuff. For me, I was basically like, there is no reason why I can't go from fresh juice in my kitchen to creating a fresh juice drink, and let's just give it a go. But luckily for me, I did decide to do this trial production with the guys, and it threw up a couple of really big problems. Notably that ginger, when you juice it, produces loads of this starch, which acts like a non-Newtonian fluid. So kind of like custard, where you put pressure on it and it turns into a solid, cornstarch, sorry, not custard. You put pressure on it and it turns into a real kind of solid, like you grip it and it's almost like a feta cheese consistency, and then you relax your hand and it runs through like a liquid. It's crazy. It's actually really cool to see. But unfortunately it does block a lot of pipes, and that creates a really inconsistent product if you're not careful. And certainly in our first batch of drinks, even knowing this after our trial production, we had lots of variability in what was in our cans.
And with the factory, how do you go about finding a factory?
Oh yeah, that's another good question. That came from my 2 weeks of phone calls right at the beginning. So my mentee in my last job, his friend's girlfriend's brother. No, something like that.
So
like,
your mentees.
No, my mentee's
Girlfriends.
my mentee's sister's friend. Maybe it was only twice removed, but it was definitely pretty obscure. And this kind of, I think this shows when you do something kind of interesting, people are, your network does actually go quite far, which is fun. But anyway, he was, his name is James, and I spoke to him really early on, and he and his brother have a hard seltzer business called Arrowtown. And they were about 6 months ahead of me, and they'd found these fantastic guys down in Devon who were a really nice small entrepreneurial team. And basically I just chatted to them. I remember a really big deal for me at the beginning was, will these guys take my juicer and deal with this process? And we didn't know that stuff would block pipes at the time. If I told him, if I told the managing director, Sean, at the time, he probably wouldn't have worked with me. But I didn't know, luckily, so I didn't tell him.
Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss. And then they were like, yeah, cool, let's get it done. And because they were willing to work with me and thought that the idea of producing a fresh juice product sounded cool, and I'd taken them a couple of my kitchen recipes for them to try, they're like, yeah, we'll give this a go. But I had to return to like the problems, there was an inconsistency issue, but the bigger one was that the drink wasn't safe. So when you produce from fresh ingredients, you usually have quite a lot of stuff, microbiology, yeast, whatever it may be, in your juice that you wouldn't normally get if you use extracts or something that's been pre-filtered or pre-pasteurized, which is where most of the flavors in canned drinks come from. They'll come from something that has been treated in some way to make it a bit more sterile. So for us, we were packaging up our juice, so our ginger and lime juice, and then steeping our mint into our water, and adding our maple syrup, putting it in a can, pasteurizing it in our trial at an industry standard temperature, which is 75 degrees for 10 minutes. Pretty sure that everything would be fine, and it actually wasn't fine at all. And I use the phrase teeming with life to describe what was in the cans, which is
technically accurate.
I would say not technically accurate, but it definitely, there was enough stuff living in there to make the product unsellable over any kind of significant period of time. And that was incredibly concerning for me, because I had used my 40 kilograms of ginger for my test run, but I still had 960 kilograms sitting in cold storage that would eventually go off. It wouldn't last forever.
That was something I wanted to actually ask as well, because you mentioned earlier one of the mistakes you made was that you didn't necessarily figure out product market fit before you sort of jumped in and went with it. So if you were to go back and do that again, how would you do it differently?
There wasn't product market fit in the sense that I had kind of orders already and I hadn't done Kickstarter or anything like that. The kind of ways that people would typically gauge demand for a product and actually will people pay. But I'd done loads and loads of trials with friends of mine. We were coming out of lockdown, I think, in early 2020, and I was cycling loads of batches of ginger beer around London, and I got maybe an N of probably over 100 in terms of tastings. Me basically putting the drinks in front of people and asking them what they thought of it, and I was staring them in the eyes as I am doing to you guys when you were trying the drinks, and the feedback would have inevitably been very biased. But I
did notice that, by the way. I noticed when I was drinking it, your eyes were like dead on me.
Oh God!
To be like, no, it's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I would have done the same thing. You're just looking for every reaction. Like, are they being genuine? Do they actually like it? Are they saying that because you're on camera? Like, I get that.
But it graduated from that to I got a market stall license. Probably one of the best decisions I think I've ever made over the business lifetime. I think it was week 2, I kicked off my process with Islington Council to get a pitch, a markets trading pitch, and that's actually, to this day, we do it on a Sunday in Camden Passage. We have a market stall there, and that allowed me to do broader product testing. I initially wanted to do a kind of innocent smoothie style, love it, hate it situation, and I did. But because the feedback was good enough and I had lots of different batches on my table that I'd sort of tweaked in various ways, so people were trying them and telling me what they liked and didn't like, I think that gave me the confidence to make stuff, even though I didn't necessarily know at that point how I was going to sell it, where I was going to sell it. I knew I was going to launch a website and I knew I had the store, but I didn't have any retail traction at all. So I guess my comment at the beginning was, it was more that I didn't know for certain that it would sell. I didn't have any contracts, and what I did was pretty risky and potentially quite foolhardy to go and make a product, but it was off the back of lots of testing and lots of feedback. So I was diligent in the sense that I didn't just kind of chill in my kitchen and make lots of recipes and think, oh god, that tastes nice. I bet people are going to love this, and then give it a whirl. It was much more the case that I was quite keen to fine tune it, and that's why I made it to 38 recipes. And
in the market stall days, what kind of numbers were you doing?
In terms of sales per day, I guess maybe I was selling ginger beer at that point by the cup, and I still do the market stall, as I say, but right at the beginning, ginger beer by the cup, I guess maybe like 150 pounds of revenue. But if you go about the lengthy process with your local council to get a street trading pitch, and lots of them are unavailable because they're very popular, you can get an unbelievably good rate. So if we show up every single Sunday in a month, we end up paying about £21.75 for a whole Sunday of trading in one of Islington's busiest streets, which is unreal.
That's crazy.
When you think about the amount of money it takes to basically set up at any event, where you'd have, I know you could see it as a marketing opportunity too, but for most people it's just like selling or getting the brand out there. We get to stand there in an unbelievable place for very little money. So I'd highly recommend giving your local council a bell if you're interested in starting a food and drink business.
Hey guys, I just wanted to take a second to talk about our sponsor for this episode, Furniture Box. Furniture Box is an online furniture retailer that makes awesome products for everywhere from your bedroom to your office. Now, we actually had Monty and Dan, the co-founders, on our show. That's how we met. We loved their story and we hung out with them afterwards, and we knew that we wanted to work with them. And here's the thing. One of the biggest issues I have whenever I've ordered furniture in the past is that certain big name furniture companies, not naming any names, will charge you a fairly large fee for delivery, and even then that delivery usually takes a few days, if not longer. With Furniture Box, not only do they offer free next day delivery, but they're now planning on extending their delivery cutoff even more so that you can literally order a dining set as late as 8 p.m. and be eating dinner on it the next day. So to put it simply, there's no one in the UK furniture scene that's doing anything like what they're doing, and we're thrilled to have them as our sponsor. So click the link in the description and check them out. Now back to the episode.
Can you talk us through the process of finding a co-founder and how you knew you were ready to find a co-founder?
Yeah, so this is jumping forward a little bit in time. So it was about 18 months in, I decided that it would be good to get someone on. The process of the actual doing it, I put a post up on LinkedIn, and that was pretty much end of. I put a post up on Instagram and on LinkedIn, and just kind of wanted to see how far it went. I gave I guess you guys must know a little bit about LinkedIn marketing. I gave the post some attributes that I thought might make it more widely seen than others. It wasn't just hey, here's a job description, share with your network. I kind of made it a bit about the business journey and made it kind of quite engaging. So it ended up that about 50,000 people saw the post. And from that, I had some really high quality applications.
Oh, interesting.
And one of those was my co-founder, Lucy, who, as it happens, was working with a girl I knew from university at BBH advertising agency, and she kind of checked with our mutual friend Joy. She was like, "Is Will a decent guy? Like, what's the crack with his little startup thing?" And then she came to interview, and she was absolutely fantastic.
And what role was she being brought on for?
So it was called a co-founder, and that's confusing for a lot of people. God, I'm aware that there's lots of confusing elements about my business. I really need to
This isn't a podcast. This is therapy.
I really need to sit down and rebrand the whole thing. But yeah, it is confusing because people are like, well, Lucy wasn't there at the beginning, so how could she possibly be a co-founder? But the title makes complete sense to me, and hopefully also to her, because her role is entirely as broad as mine. Like, her remit is absolutely everything. Yeah. And the idea,
standard startup kind of
standard startup type thing. And the idea was very much to bring on someone to increase our capacity and how much we could do, but give someone the same kind of breadth of experience that I've been having, because I was enjoying it. I was having a brilliant time, and as I was saying before about building the team, you kind of want to share that with someone. And I'm very lucky that I found Lucy, whose skill set is slightly different to my own, but we have a very similar attitude to lots of the important things. And my final recruitment stage was getting her to sell at our Sunday market stall, which I was talking about before, and watching her interact with people and the respect she has for other people is kind of so core to how I view the world. And when you are selling a product and promoting a product like this, a food and drink thing, you have to be totally respectful to everyone and non-judgmental. And watching Lucy flog ginger beer in Camden Passage on a Sunday, it was very obvious to me that she not only got the products really well, but wanted to treat people well and kindly and make sure that they were nourished and had very similar kind of alignment in values to me.
Had the right values.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on something, it's a little bit more serious, but it's what you mentioned both off air and you kind of alluded to it earlier in the interview, but you mentioned that you nearly lost your life.
So I was out. I had the most amazing 6 months between graduating from university and starting my first job, or it's supposed to be the most amazing 6 months. I trailed along with my parents on their retirement trip to Australia and New Zealand to carry the bags and drive the car, which was fantastic. And then I went away for a month to do ski instructor training in Japan. I love skiing. It's another privileged aspect of my life to have gone so many times, and I just wanted to do an instructor course and ski where I'd never skied before. So I went off to Japan, and I spent I think it was about 4 weeks in total there, and qualified as an instructor. But the night I qualified, I actually got hit by a car, and the situation was I'd come back from a night out. We were celebrating having qualified as instructors. I'd actually organised a sweepstake for the person that got the highest mark in their personal skiing. Everyone puts in a beer, and the person that gets the highest mark in their personal skiing gets all the beers. And I actually ended up getting the highest mark. So I organised a sweepstake and then I swooped for everyone, swept for everyone else's drinks. And I was pretty drunk, but unfortunately my jacket had got nicked from the bar I was in, and it was freezing cold night and a bit of a blizzard. So I was basically jogging home. I'm also a big runner.
You jogged home in a blizzard?
I jogged home in a blizzard, but it felt kind of safe. Doesn't sound very safe.
Sounds like the most badass thing I've ever heard in my life.
No, it's definitely not badass, particularly not the way the story turns out. But I was very cold and needed to move, so I did jog, and I was jogging on the pavement, but I got to my accommodation and crossed the road, and I think I was jogging. I don't remember it super clearly, and slipped over, and then a car came and hit me, just in the leg, which was very lucky, because if it had been my head or my chest, it would have been probably instant death. Unfortunately, the car was traveling quite fast, and then that was, felt like a bit of a blessing, to be honest. It was very, very painful, but very lucky that it wasn't more serious, because you say it, described it as badass. I think it's one of the most embarrassing things I've done in my life, and what I put my family through. Not great.
That's quite a reflective way to look at it.
Well, I think it comes from a stance of, it was very unlucky. Lots of things went wrong. Blizzard, very difficult to see down the length of the road, impossible to see that a car was coming anytime soon. Crossing the road, slipping over is unlucky. But I think you do kind of need to own up and take responsibility for decisions you make in your life that put you in positions like that. And certainly me going out for a big night drinking, as fun as it was, to then jog back in a blizzard, badass but dumb, I would say.
I respect that.
How does your, if at all, kind of perspective change when something like that happens?
Well, the crucial bit of the story is that wasn't the near death bit. So I was then in hospital, and I had an operation to put metal in my leg, and the operation went really well. But the morning afterwards, I woke up with a really bad complication with my lungs called acute respiratory distress. And when people die from COVID, that's often the condition they end up in, and it's very life threatening. So the worst part of the whole thing was I woke up in a big fever the day after the operation, and I was rushed around the hospital doing loads and loads of checks, and I was taken to this big room with every doctor and nurse that I'd seen during my time in this small ski hospital called Kuchan Hospital. And then the chief of the hospital kind of came to my bedside and said, we need to kind of sedate you now, because there's quite a big risk to your life. And I
don't even know how I'd respond if someone said that to me.
Yeah, I was worried. I was quite grateful that they weren't going to have to amputate my leg, because no one had told me anything. and I'd kind of assumed that was the way things were going because it seemed like an urgent situation.
Oh, was that on the cards?
I don't think it was on the cards, but that's what was in my head.
Your thought
because
was,
there
I just
was
had an operation on my
yeah,
leg, so it
exactly.
must
Like
be-
something
right.
must have gone wrong. There was an infection somewhere. I was talked through about all the kind of operational risks ahead of the operation. Anyway, so very luckily for me, my dad was out in Japan with me. He'd flown out when I was originally hit by the car, so he was there with me for the operation and in the aftermath. And I insisted that they didn't sedate me until he'd arrived. And so I got to kind of hug him and basically say goodbye. But I had to call my mum and my brothers back here in the UK and kind of deliver the news and come to terms with the fact that I might not see them again, which was hard. But anyway, it turns into a happy story because I was sedated. I was put in a coma for a few days. I was transferred to Sapporo, which is the capital of Hokkaido, the top island in Japan, to a bigger hospital there with a bigger intensive care. And almost as quickly as things had gone wrong, they kind of fixed themselves and I was fine. I unfortunately still had a broken leg. I kind of woke up from my coma and I was like, great, what a wonderful thing to be alive. And then I was like, oh, my leg's still screwed, which is, yeah.
That's a really, I mean, that's a really intense experience, man.
Yeah.
I can't imagine like, having to make that phone call.
Yeah, the phone call was
To your mum.
The phone call was really hard. I think as the time's passed, because this was 2017. As the time's passed, I think I talk about it with kind of increasing ease. But unfortunately, we lost my dad quite recently, and I think that's kind of it's kind of brought everything back a little bit. You know, my dad was there for me at a crucial time. So yeah.
And so, how does your if as to say, if at all, does your perspective change?
Yes, sorry, to return to your question.
Because that's obviously such a pivotal moment in someone's life when that happens. So
God, it makes you think, I reckon, about the positions that you put yourself in and what is important kind of in the end. Because as I said to you just before we started, I was kind of sort of on my deathbed, although not on my deathbed as it turned out, and thinking about what was important in my life. And you only really think about your relationships with other people. So for me, I'm very close with my family, and I certainly made the decision from then on to really prioritize them as much as I could. I think I was still, in the couple of years after, I was still quite young and a bit foolhardy about it, but I think I see very clearly now that if you're, to bring it back a little bit, I think a good day for me looks like I'm proud of every single decision I've made. And the way I think about it now is the pride in my decisions come from knowing how to prioritize things in my life and respond to things in the best way. So if something is happening with my family or one of my friends, I want to have the presence of mind and the perspective to be like, actually, what am I doing right now? And what is so important that I'm doing right now, particularly with regard to work, which is a big focus of people our age. What is the thing that I'm doing that is so critically important that I can't show up for someone that I love or that I care about? And I've promised myself that as far as possible, I will try to figure out actually the interplay between those forces and prioritize effectively. So it's not always easy. Like recently, my mum said, "Oh, I'm gonna go away to." She wants to go to America to visit some family friends, and she asked me if I wanted to come on the holiday with her. And if I was totally focused on my family, I would be like, absolutely. It's the first time my mum will have been away without my dad, and it'd be nice for her to have company. But I also have to balance that a little bit against what's going on with my business, which is also really important to me. And ultimately, does my mum need me there? And then I speak to her and I say, "Mum, do you need me there?" And she said no, and that's kind of the situation sorted. But I think really considering how who needs you and how they might need you, and trying to get a bit of dialogue going so that you can figure out if you can help people when they need help.
Yeah, I think there's definitely something to be said for, especially when you're younger, but I suppose at any point when you're building something, there has to be a degree of not selfishness, but kind of enlightened self-interest. You have to be able to be like, I have some sort of purpose that I'm trying to achieve here, and I have to make some sacrifices for it, even if they might not be the sacrifices that, you know, I want to make. And I think everyone talks about sacrifices. It's quite a common thing, you know. It's like, hey, you got to sacrifice if you want to build something and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's only when you're actually faced with those situations where it's like, yeah, you know, you probably would have loved to spend time with your mum, but you do. That is a sacrifice. It's not a sacrifice like seeing that friend that you don't really want to see and being like, oh, sorry, man, can't make it. Yeah, that's not really a sacrifice. Yeah, but it's a sacrifice when it's like, I really want to do that thing, but I can't because of how dedicated I am to this thing.
Yeah, and I think trying to figure out, actually unpick why you want what you want, and is that actually the best course of action for you and the people you care about is also is good. But I think the sacrifices I'm willing to make, kind of exactly as you're saying, I'm willing to spend most of my Sunday working behind a market stall in Camden Passage because I know I enjoy it and it's fun and it's good for the business, and I've missed out on a bunch of Sunday lunches and maybe a bit of sport too, the occasional football game, because of that. But that is a sacrifice that I'm very willing to make, and it's there I'm only considering my own enjoyment. It's quite singular. But as soon as someone you care about enters the frame, whether that's a family member or a friend, and you start thinking about actually how much does my commitment to whatever they're doing make a difference to their lives, then I think it becomes a lot less clear. And as the best advice I could give is just trying to appraise that in the most rational way of how important is this person to you, and how important is whatever they're doing that they need you for, and then trying to make a decision on that basis. It's one of the key reasons that I started the business in the first place. My dad was diagnosed with a serious illness, and I wanted to be there and spend as much time with him as possible. And I'm very proud and lucky that I've managed to do that. I've sold some ginger beer along the way, but it's created a life for me that has allowed for the kind of flexibility that I was looking for. And this is, like we were saying at the beginning, just like being able to prioritize things effectively is actually really, really hard, because all kind of stresses and time pressures and deadlines come into your life, particularly in the course of an ordinary job or a high pressure job, whatever job you do. And it's really important not to let those forces kind of overcome you and stop you realizing what is important.
I think there's also a benefit to being older when you go through something like that as well, because I lost my dad to a serious illness, but I was 18, and so it was kind of 16 to 18. It was like a drawn out thing, but I saw him regularly, but I didn't see him as much as definitely as much as I could have, and that's purely just because I was young and I was scared, and you don't want to see your dad in that state. You know, your dad's like kind of like a superhero to you when you're young, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think, you know, there's probably a degree of when you get older, like you said, you wanted to spend as much time with him as you could.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, and it's a lot harder when you're younger, and to go through that at that age is very tough. But yeah, luckily for me, I'd had the thing in Japan, and then my dad's illness came along too, and both are sort of similar in the sort of focal point being on your family. And I think that did make me realize very clearly that I needed to do something. There's always one moment that I point to in this kind of whole episode, which is, I remember one evening my dad had actually just been diagnosed with his illness, and I was like deep in an Excel model. I used to love Microsoft Excel, still do actually.
I love a good Google sheet. I love a good Google sheet.
Yeah, you would actually be very, very popular with my co-founder Lucy, who thinks that Excel is not the way to go, and Google Sheets are. Because
Google Sheets,
I'm definitely more Excel. I'm with you on that.
Bun the both of you. Lucy, if you're watching this, you rock. Stick with Google Sheets. Like 100%, that is the way to go.
Yeah, in terms of functionality, Excel is way better.
It is. We can leave it at that. Yeah.
My old music manager used to say that all the time. I'd make something up in a doc, and he'd be like, "Doc, can we just put it in an Excel sheet? I can't use the formulas in this." And it's like, but it's on Google. It's easy. You can just
like those F keys and everything is. Yeah.
But then you have to rely on the person having Excel, otherwise they can't open it or use it. Google Sheets, true. I can send it to anyone, and anyone can use it.
No, that is the key point, I think. So I use Google Sheets almost as much as I use Excel now. I use both, but yeah, I can't remember where we were even going with that before the heated Google Sheet Excel debate. So I'm losing
you were saying how you put into an Excel spreadsheet something. You were talking about
What did I put into
a
an
memory
Excel
that you had
spreadsheet?
with your dad.
Yes,
That
I
was
was
it.
working very, very intensely on an Excel spreadsheet, and my dad gave me a call, and I didn't pick up the call because I felt like the Excel model I was working on was so much more important than answering a call from my dad who'd just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. Like, what the hell is that? That is a terrible, terrible decision, objectively. And I think holding that up to the cold light of day afterwards really did make me kind of question what was going on. And I know I would have seen it. I wouldn't say that I have had brilliant perspective through my life, but I wouldn't have said that I'm the least caring or the person with the least perspective in the room ever. But there was still something going on, and the stress of that job that was making me act in a way that was totally irrational if you really think about what is important to me.
It's been a really enlightening conversation.
Oh my God, yeah. Sorry, it's gone in ways that I guess
No, but that's
maybe
good.
all of us didn't
but
expect.
that's
It
the-
flows
the
where
way
it
it
needs to
goes.
flow, you know? We like to wrap up by asking everyone the same question,
Okay.
which is obviously the focal point of the show is practical business advice or creative advice.
I'm not
whatever
sure
it
I've
might be.
given much practical business advice.
We've done quite a lot of practical.
It's been okay.
Yeah, we've done good.
We've done a lot of
okay.
practical. And you've really drilled into like suppliers and ingredients, and
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. You've been more practical. If you watch it back, you've been more practical than maybe you think you have.
Okay.
But the final question we like to ask all guests is for anyone out there who might already have a business or be thinking of starting a business,
Yes.
if you could give them one piece of practical advice, like actionable advice that could help them, what would it be? So, straying away from the just believe in yourself and you really got to want it, that kind of stuff, and something that's like, could be anything: salary, marketing, hiring, product ideation, anything.
God, it's never good when everyone's like, believe in yourself, you got this.
Oh, it
It's
sucks.
just not very. It's just not very helpful.
Sucks, dude.
It's really not very helpful.
Sucks, dude.
I'll give a food and drink specific one and then a more general one.
Okay.
The
Amazing.
food
Go
and
for
drink
it.
specific one, I think, is definitely try to get some kind of market stall set up or somewhere where you can sample or deliver your products to a broad audience and get feedback. It's great for giving you confidence that you're not onto something completely kind of out of this world in terms of no one wants it, but is also really good for kind of building up a bit of enthusiasm and early momentum with any business you're building. And the community we built around the market store has been invaluable and a great source of support when we've needed it. And the more general one would be when you're prototyping, do think very, very carefully about doing test runs, doing trials before you go to things at a massive scale. I think that won't come as any shock to people, but I think that actually getting a minimum viable or a prototype done, putting it in front of people and seeing how they respond before then going and scaling up is a really good shout. And I'm not only alluding to kitchen recipe and sampling amongst your friends, but also that trial batch where I tried to make kind of a mini quantity of something, and it immediately threw up two pretty major issues that otherwise would have meant, if I hadn't noticed them, that the business would have ceased to exist almost before it started. So make sure to do your trials and tests and prototype thoroughly.
That's really
Awesome.
good advice.
This has been a really fun conversation, man. I think, I mean, look, I love the product. I think you got a really awesome drink. It looks cool. It feels healthy. I don't feel bad having drunk it. It tastes really nice. And I think you're a very self-aware and a very kind and a very conscious individual. And I think you're going to have a lot of success. And I think you've got a really, really cool product. It's been really, really cool to talk to you, man.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much for having me on. It's been a fun conversation. As I said, it's gone in ways that I wasn't entirely expecting, and I love delivering kind of practical, helpful advice. So if anyone would like to ask specific questions about starting a drink business, please do get in touch, DM or email.
So I was going to say, where can people find the Root Co? You can go directly into camera over
into the camera.
Now's your time to plug, baby.
I mean, it's genuinely more for just questions, but if anyone wants to email us, you can find our email on our website, or you can just DM us on Instagram, and myself or Lucy will pick it up, and we'll come to you with a nice answer for anything you need.
But also, it is a really good drink. So where can people get it?
Oh, sorry.
'Cause I want you to make sure you sell some of these drinks, because I really like them.
Sorry. So you can find the drinks on our website. A lot around Islington, nice delis, cafes around there, and Planet Organic is still a good place to sweep one up.
Amazing.
Awesome.
Right.
Guys, you heard it. I mean, look, he's so humble. He didn't even want to plug his own drinks when he had the chance. That's how nice he is, and the drink is awesome. So make sure you go grab some drinks. Be sure to subscribe, turn on post notifications, and we'll be in the comments for the first hour of the video. So if you have any thoughts on the episode, then please do jump in. But for now, we will see you guys next week. Will, thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much, guys.